കേൾക്കാമോ എന്നെ?
Sir.
Okay.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
സാർ നമുക്ക് സെഷൻ തുടങ്ങിയാലോ?
തുടങ്ങാലോ.
ഓക്കെ. ആൻഡ് വെൽക്കം പറയാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് അഖിലയെ ക്ഷണിച്ചോളുന്നു.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening to one and all present here, respected resource person, faculty members, and all dear friends. Today we are here to begin another session of our certificate course on media, ethics, and law. It's my immense pleasure to welcome our resource person, Dr. Girishankar SS, Associate Professor, Government Law College, Ernakulam. Today, he will be dealing the topic right to know, right to information, and the fourth estate. So, on behalf of Government Law College, Trivandrum, and the entire team of the certificate course, I welcome you, sir, to take over the session. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Akhila. I think I'm audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, you are.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So it's my privilege and pleasure to be part and parcel of one of a very important visionary program organized by the Government Law College Ernakulam, Government Law College Trivandrum, in fact, where I was a part-time lecturer during the year 1998, and then a lecturer 2000 to 2003. And besides, many of my working there, and have got very sweet memories of my days in Trivandrum. In fact, this is a wonderful program, just like it's an add-on course, I understand. And the topic that is being selected is a very important topic. And many of your, in fact, teachers, coordinators are my colleagues. So I think they have got that visionary seal to select this program for your add-on course. Very important aspect. Even though you are learning the concept of press freedom and its entitlements in constitutional law, because of the constraints of the syllabus, you may not be able to give so much room or so much importance to the span and width of this particular topic. So it will be always better to add or replenish the topics through lateral entries like certificate courses, where we have to understand what is the seminal role played by the press in the society, how our constitution and the legal architecture looks upon such an exercise, and how profound is the concept of right to free speech, particularly in a constitutional democracy like ours. I'll be dealing a very small topic, which has been assigned to me, that is right to know, right to information, and fourth estate. So I'll just, I think for convenience sake, I need to refer some materials of mine. So I will switch off my video and proceed with my presentation. So friends, I told you that this is a wonderful topic, wonderful area that a law student has to essentially learn, because without which we cannot have a decent and meaningful existence in this world. As law students, you need no introduction to the concept of right to know and right to information. In fact, I believe that right to information precedes right to know, because knowledge is power, you have already learned, but information is something that is to be converted into knowledge. So information is at the base level, which has to be translated into information based on context, which gives you an idea as to the knowledge that you have to acquire on a particular topic. So information has to be processed, to be learned, to be understood, to exactly know as to what is its bearing on certain context, which we call as knowledge. See, when we discuss, or when we, particularly in the Indian settings, when we discuss right to information, where from it has been derived, it is our mighty constitution, through in the scheme of fundamental freedom, that is fundamental right to freedoms, and the first of that cherished fundamental freedom accommodates or houses the freedom of speech and expression under Article 19, Clause 1A, Clause A, Subclause A, where we are being given the basic freedom to know yourself, to know others, and also let others know you, isn't it? 3 planes. മലയാളം കൂടി പറയാം, നമ്മളെ അറിയാൻ, മറ്റൊരാളെ അറിയാൻ, നമ്മളെ മറ്റൊരാൾക്ക് അറിയിക്കാൻ. In the 3 planes, that's very important, because there essentially the dialogue happens, there essentially the conversation happens, there exactly the sharing of information and knowledge happens, isn't it? And over a period of time, by using the engine of, or rather the media of constitutional interpretations, right to know has been read into Article 21 as an enriching element, as a nutritional element to right to life and liberty. It improves the quality of well-being of the individuals, particularly in the matter of proceeding with a meaningful life, or living meaningfully in this earth. So as I told you, information in fact shapes knowledge. Whether we in society are having a symmetry regarding information, no. We are having a heavily, our society is an information asymmetry prone one, isn't it? Is everybody having the same scale of information regarding a particular topic, a subject? No. For example, today, the central government, or rather the government, started an ambitious program, and obviously under the program of the central government, that a person who has turned, or the senior citizens, and also persons who have crossed 45 years of age but having serious ailments, are being prioritized for getting vaccinated, isn't it? Yesterday itself, so many persons have, I got at least 5 or 6 calls as to what is the way in which, what is the method that is to be adopted, whether we have to go to the spot or that particular hospital for a spot registration, or whether we have to register through any portal like that, isn't it? So this is the common state of affairs in the society, because there is no symmetry regarding receipt of information, isn't it? Because this information is being disseminated through various means. It reaches in various shapes and various levels, or the content will be varying. When we analyze, or when we find the different stratas of society, isn't it? Our society is heavily stratified, and there are persons who are not at all getting any information. There may be stratas of society or category of persons, cross-section persons, who will be getting half the information, and some of the privileged class will be getting the comprehensive information. So Regarding the control over information, I think there is a asymmetry. So when we analyze that our society is not having a symmetrical output regarding information, content, knowledge, etc., so naturally, the constitutional vision regarding the delivering capabilities, that has to be explored, isn't it? So there, access to information has to be there. You need to have near total, near perfect access and information in different forms. For getting information, you need the conduits of communication, isn't it? Dissemination should be there. There should be efficient communication system so that it takes the information content to every nook and corner of the society. So when we talk about that particular entity which takes information to the nook and corner of a society, suddenly the media as an purveyor of information, as a gatherer of information, as a disseminator of information comes to our mind, isn't it? So there, right to information, which is being guaranteed through free speech, doctrine, free speech concept, in Article 19, Clause 1, Clause A, becomes materialized through one of the prominent agencies that we can call as media. So the importance of right to information was scaled up, or rather mounted, when information or right, when it was transformed as a right, and it has been given a constitutional status in the shape of a fundamental right. So that is where the right to information or right to know, in fact, becomes so powerful. It's a defining moment. So access to information is a very critical aspect, and it has got multi-layered existence because different classes of society are there. So it will be very difficult to consider them as one single whole. It cannot be rationalized. So you need more ideas to ensure that information reaches everywhere. So why or in what way information or knowledge enhances the capacity of an average being, isn't it? Only when you are being informed about what is happening around you, that a person will be able to understand the values of governance, isn't it? What is that the government is doing to us? Whether we are being duly taken care of, what are the government policies? What are the government welfare initiatives of the government, isn't it? How many vacancies are to be reported? Whether in the reported vacancies, the list has been extinguished, or how many percentage of those persons in the rank list have been subsumed into that particular categories, isn't it? See, all these are informations. Everywhere it is information, isn't it? So that is why press, in fact, does a very important role in the matter of not only gathering, but also disseminating information. So right to information, right to knowledge becomes tangible products, isn't it? It is a tangible product. കാണാൻ കഴിയുന്ന രീതിയിലേക്ക് അതിനെ ട്രാൻസ്ലേറ്റ് ചെയ്യപ്പെടുന്നു. Only when there is an agency which takes on its broad shoulders that basic commitment to conduct, or rather to distribute and redistribute information. So that is part of a free speech, because only if you are in control of information, you can have a better control of the guarantees of Constitution, particularly freedom to speak, freedom to know, fundamental right of the freedom to know, speak, express oneself, and to prioritize one's existence, right? Obviously, when we talk about information, or rather right to information, there are several contingencies also. There are certain challenges also. One thing is that there are restrictions of information. There will be access to, or rather there will be restrictions on access to information due to so many things, isn't it? You might have heard of emergency, You might have heard of certain situations. Even in the pandemic situations, what happened? See, even there was control in the matter of dissemination of information, isn't it? Suppose we are living in Kashmir, suppose we are living in border areas, there also we find we are the information content will be constricted like anything, maybe because of the geopolitical situations prevailing there, right? So suppose if the government decides that the communication has to be snapped for a particular end, just like what happened in Kashmir, which has led to the Anuradha Basin's case and all these things, isn't it? Where the internet has been snapped, other communications have been snapped, even post offices were closed, isn't it? Likewise, you find if that the means of communications are not there naturally, our drive to get information or information-based other aspects, that will be curtailed. So there are so many ways in which information or access to information can be barred, and which will have a disastrous effect on the quality of well-being of individuals. So when we speak about press, freedom of press, I think that had already been covered in your previous lectures. But since we are touching upon the constitutional aspects of right to know and right to information, how exactly that freedom of press is being guaranteed in India? And what is the contrast that is happening somewhere else, isn't it? When we discuss or when we try to identify the nature of press freedom that is ensured through the Constitution, we will not find any particular direct entitlement to that freedom in anywhere within the scheme of fundamental rights, isn't it? Even if you discuss deep into the basic entitlement of 19 clause 1 clause A, it deals with the citizens' freedom or right to what? Speech and expression. Nowhere it is said, nowhere it spaces or it identifies a space for press. So then you have to take certain derivations, isn't it? If the citizen is to have freedom of speech and expression, he should be necessarily equipped with information. So where from he is to gather, of course, there are agencies of the government or some other agencies outside the purview of the state actors which provide information. But how come the common man will get a venue to know, to get informed for taking informed decisions, or at least for the sake of knowing certain things or getting informed certain things, isn't it? So if that is so, and if we place press as and the pivot of that information dissemination, then obviously the constitutional courts have richly contributed in interpreting, by taking cue of from the interpretations or various constitutional interpretations, to derive the freedom of press and to space it, to locate it, to anchor it to the free speech concept that is there available to a citizen, because without information, the speech concept of speech and expression is not going to prosper, is not going to sprout, isn't it? If we just have a comparative, if we look through a comparative lens, United States Constitution, isn't it, way back in centuries back itself, in its First Amendment, very clearly states about what, or in no uncertain terms, very clearly states that the Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or the press. Some more things there, but freedom of speech or the press, very clearly stated. Same thing you can find in Japanese Constitution and the South African Constitution made thereafter, and so many even made after the Indian Constitution. So in our Constitution, freedom of press or press freedom is not ingrained in an explicit manner, but over a period of time, that if that is being considered as a vacuum or a silence that is left behind by the Constitution makers, that has been ably filled by the interpretations of the constitutional courts, and this has really grown in strength over a period of time, isn't it? So the empowerment of society to condition that society to meet the constitutional goals, in fact, that is being oriented through interpretative devices by the constitutional code. So the free press, or rather a free speech concept attached to press freedom, is now ingrained in Article 19, Clause 1, Clause A, isn't it? Of course, you know, this is not an absolute right like any other fundamental right. This has got what objective heads of restrictions under Article 19, Clause 2, which says, as you know, about the sovereignty and integrity of India, security of state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency, morality, contempt of court, defamation, incitement and offense, and so many other aspects. But the constitution makers were so wise and so purposive, in the sense that they never left it to a speculation by the courts of law for interpreting, but other hand has provided clear-cut and objective heads of restrictions, so that will serve as a touchstone for any of the actions on the part of the state which may appear as arbitrary, wherein the restrictions have to be read along with the freedom, isn't it? But of course, when we talk about the importance of the concept of freedom of press, which has been encouraged through so many decisions, like the earlier decisions, Ramesh Thapar's case in 1950s, 51, isn't it? Then Bennett and Coleman case, and so many other cases, isn't it? Where the Indian Supreme Court has laid a firm emphasis, a firm basis for the constitutionally conceived idea of free speech, and which is having a conjoined application with the press. Even in Ramesh Thapar, if I quote, it says that freedom of speech and of the press laid the foundations of democratic organization, for without free political discussions, no public education, so essential for the proper functioning of the process of popular government is possible, right? See, but there is always a politics to every thinking, isn't it? Every complexion of thinking. And because their politics is meant as a power structure, as part of a power structure, adhikara samavakyamana, where that interrelationship between that organization as well as the individual have to be discussed, have to be gone into. And suppose the Constitution bears the torch to provide the necessary light to be thrown, obviously that constitutional democracy will have very strong fundamentals. And this the Constitutional Court in later Union of India in Association for Democratic Reforms, and so many other case laws that you might have come across very clearly laid down the importance of free press, and contextually also that has been discussed, isn't it? So whenever we discuss the concept of free press, I think whenever we discuss the concept of free press, the United States, the cases from the United States always, in fact, are lodestars for us, showing the path, isn't it? It says that free press, the important case was about the publishing of the Pentagon Papers, when secret government documents about countries' involvement in the Vietnam War, New York Times Company versus the United States. A short excerpt says that the paramount among the responsibilities, or rather it was said that the press was protected so that it could bear the secrets of the government and inform the people. And only free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government. See, government, what is government? A government should be not men by, it has to be a men by law, isn't it? Rule by law, rule of law, isn't it? Not simply a group of persons, but under the pale or under the purview of law. So, press was in fact conceived as a check or veto on limitless power of the state, isn't it? As a watchdog. So that is why, in fact, slowly the concept of a separate existence independent of the three estates, like legislature, executive, and judiciary, was in fact ascribed to the press, which in fact is the American constitutional jurisprudence, wherein the press is far more far more importance is there, far more autonomy is there, far more freedom is there, where they have explored the concept, or they have explored the might of press as a veto on the limitless power of state, particularly by strengthening the pillars of democracy, like that. So, isn't it? So, right to information and right to knowledge, which is being institutionalized, or the product, or the has been converted into tangible benefits by the press, in fact, takes us to the concept of its importance, particularly in the matter of democracy, isn't it? It strengthens democracy. That is what Ramesh Thapar said. That is what Union of India versus Association Democratic Reform said. That was what the Supreme Court in Anuradha Abbas in 2020 said, particularly when when Jammu and Kashmir was reeling under an information clampdown at the behest of the central government, isn't it? So a representative democracy, the role of the press is twofold, isn't it? It informs citizens and sets up a feedback loop between the government and the electorate, right? Now we are, in fact, passing on to the hot days of heated days of election, isn't it? In April, we are going to have election. So there is a constant dialogue. There is a constant stock taking. What this particular government has done, whether the performance of this government could be compared with the earlier government led by a different coalition. See, on what touchstone are we processing all these things? We are processing this touchstone based on information, isn't it? You said that under this particular housing scheme, we made this much houses for the needy, or this much money was earmarked for providing welfare activities, etc., etc. In what way that exchange of information is being done? It is based on information. It is based on certain plain facts, isn't it? So another related function of the press is to expose people to opinions contrary to their own. You have to have plurality of opinions. A free marketplace of ideas is surrounding you. So press, that is why that difference between news and views is there, isn't it? News and views. Views, obviously, in fact, is something that is a processed form from news, where the citizenry of this country has to be provided with a broad array of news, so that views they will be able to formulate. And if the media houses started to disseminate views, I think that is nothing but a transposition. There will be a transpositioning, or there will be an imposing, rather, of certain views over an individual who is very well capable of forming views out of a given set of information, isn't it? So anyway, another basic aspect which is as a product of right to information and right to knowledge is that it strengthens the basic pillars of democracy. It strengthens the basic aspects of participatory governance, isn't it? Participatory governance. So that is a very important aspect. Why this concept of fourth estate is very, very strong, isn't it? See, as you all know, you might have even learned in your school days that the concept of fourth estate is being attributed to Edmund Burke, a very famous British politician, isn't it? Where he said that there are three basic estates: the king, the clergy, and the commoners. But you just focus towards that gallery of the legislature. There you find a resourceful group of persons who can work as the fourth estate, and who in fact has got a very who have to have a very independent existence. But then such persons, or such group of persons, form that fourth estate, who will have a forensic eye, who will have a hawk's eye as to what is happening around. Not only having that eye, but they are gatherers of information, and they are conduits of those that information package which has to ultimately reach the people without any reservation, without any tainted, without any tainting, without any adulteration, etc., etc., isn't it? So that is from where the concept of the fourth estate gained importance, isn't it? Where the United States, why we have to fall back on United States Constitution and the Supreme Court is that when we discuss the concept of press freedom and the very existence of press and the anchoring of press to the society, the large literature that you find, but maybe because of the fact that press is given a free hand, because the Constitution, as I have told you in the First Amendment, has given a large space for press, where a blanket ban for the control of press is being there. So naturally, it had got a veritable space to perform. Maybe because of that, that may be the reason why we find a large volume of both constitutional literature as well as other aspects, which in fact traces the significance of press as a fourth estate. See, when I just was reading some materials, I find that in the first 130 years or so, after the First Amendment, there wasn't much replenishment, or rather additions, from the part of the United States Supreme Court, even though there were so many issues being dragged to the attention of the court, and it lay dormant, where I think the literature says that till the close of the World War I, the fruits of the First Amendment of the Constitution, in fact, it lay dormant. Then, thereafter, if you take into account the next 4 decades, you find illuminating opinions put forward by the court, and gradually the concept of fourth estate evolved from the opinions of the United States Supreme Court. Why it is so important in India is that there is always a give and take as far as the constitutional courts are concerned, particularly when we have drawn the fundamental rights from the United States Constitution. The traffic between the principles in both these democracies, in fact, is very thick. And even the Supreme Court of the United States draws inspiration from the judgments, or rather the constitutional interpretations which had been made on the part of the Indian judiciary, and vice versa. So if we just travel through the opinion of the Supreme Court, the court recognized at least 2 or 3 inherent qualities for the press to be called as a fourth estate, isn't it? See, you are addressing legislature, executive, and judiciary as 3 strong pillars, isn't it? Where the entire structure lies. And you identify a fourth estate, then it has to vie with these 3 agencies in terms of its merit, in terms of its performance, in terms of the expectations that could be placed on it. If so, certain inherent qualities of a fourth estate has been identified. One is that it is being identified as an institution. The press is being identified as an institution, isn't it? Second aspect is that it should have independence. And that independence is fueled by the editorial discretion. Every newspaper or a print or some other media have got a policy on its own, isn't it? That independence. It's not aligned. Because if only it is independent, it can have a very dispassionate view on certain things. And it can only identify what exactly is a news and get that news to the reader or the viewer without it getting tainted, isn't it? So absolute independence is one particular aspect. And third important function is that it is a watchdog, isn't it? It's a watchdog. Any excess, it pounces upon it, isn't it? It is having a hawk's eye. Even in Kerala or in India, we find, or at least in 2019 and 20, how many cases press has filed before the Supreme Court, particularly on so many issues. isn't it? The Wire, the Mint, and so many agencies have preferred litigations before the Supreme Court or even the High Courts, isn't it? Where they got certain remedies also, illuminating remedies also. So watchdog aspect is a very important. So three attributes: it is an institution, it has got the much needed independence in the form of editorial discretion, and it has got the key function of remaining as a watchdog, isn't it? But so these three roles have to continuously be there, or else fourth estate will start to lose that might or that importance or significance. So my question to you is that, do you find any relevant situations wherein these three aspects are being gradually getting waned as an institution, whether it continues to exhibit the resourcefulness of an institution, or whether it is slowly sliding into that of an industry? Because in India, you find majority of the newspapers are being owned by big business magnates or big business houses. So when it comes to business houses, then naturally what happens is that, see, it is a trade. If it is a trade, then naturally it has to adopt some policies of sustenance, isn't it? Sustenance. You might have heard of Express newspapers versus Union of India, where newsprint, there was a restriction on the import of newsprint. The orders were issued by the central government, and the matter was raised and was challenged as violative of the freedom of press, which is implicit in Article 19, Clause 1, Clause A, and the matter was taken under Article 32 before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court saw it as a veiled attempt on the part of the government concerned to bruise or to negate the freedom that is guaranteed under Article 19(1)(a), isn't it? Or suppose if there is a restriction on seeking advertisements. See, when this is a business practice, or when this is an industry, or if it is a trade, simply that profit and loss matters, market matters, isn't it? See, the market matters. The recent aspect or the recent incident of CRP ratings, isn't it? Where Arnab Goswami was was imprisoned. Not for the other one, but CRP also, I think he is facing serious action to increase the ratings, to enhance to scale up the ratings of a particular channel, isn't it? That is very important. That's very competitive. Even in the channels that is prevailing in Kerala, you find that say that Asianet matram or Asianet orupadi munnil allengil Manorama orupadi munnil ennokku parayunnundu. See, the ratings of it matters. What is the level of viewership that you possess? Because that is the asset, that is the capital that you have got. Because you are simply an establishment where you have to disburse salary, you have to maintain the assets, you have to have establishment cost. For that, you need revenue generation too, isn't it? So as an institution, when it becomes an institution which works in a market, fiercely competitive market, then how far they can fit in to the expectation of a fourth estate, that's a big question, isn't it? Second aspect is independence. Independence is also important because monopolization of media houses is what's happening in India, right? We have got large monopoly being created, and which could squarely be brought under the ambit, or rather the investigation of the Competition Commission of India. Because dominance, isn't it? Simply dominance of that relevant market, if it is to be assessed, then media houses need to be brought within that particular scrutiny. Where if a business house owns a particular newspaper, then naturally it may have certain tailor-made editorial policies. It may have certain tailor-made policies of its own, which may not be having that much independence that it ought to have reflected if it is to be qualified by the term fourth estate, right? So that is yet another aspect, wherein you find that from the basic requirements, a slide happens, isn't it? It goes down. And thirdly, the key press function is of a watchdog, isn't it? As a watchdog, you have to bark, or you have even to advance close to biting, isn't it? But whether you are performing at that particular level, or whether there is a collusion, isn't it? You have heard of paid news. You have heard of so many other illegal consideration or colorable exercises, isn't it? Where you find from a watchdog, it will become a tamed dog, wagging its tail, isn't it? Is that what is expected? So in some areas, you find at least in the three basic attributes that enables it to be qualified to be addressed as a fourth estate. There is a slide, particularly at the institutional level, secondly at the independence level, and thirdly, and the key function which is being earmarked on a media, isn't it? So I think the concept of how far it can be called as a fourth estate, whether it is filling that particular pigeonhole of fourth estate with all sincerity, with all of its deliverables, that is a thing that we have to consider to be read in that particular context, isn't it? So that is a major aspect. So right to know and right to information translated as tangible products, then as part of it, the freedom of press is being guaranteed by the basic document of this country. There are indeed sectoral regulations, isn't it? But the considerable freedom is there provided to it. The concept of self-regulation is mooted as far as media is concerned. We have got Press Council Act, isn't it, which is one of the formidable entity which regulates the press. And there are other sectoral legislations and regulators as well. But then, how far the media is protected from a disintegration from within? That is a particular thing that the media has to address if it is to fill into that pigeonhole of fourth estate. It's a very important thing. And the last component, see, media faces onslaughts from so many things, isn't it? So many things. Press freedom it's getting diminution because of so many things, isn't it? So these are also things that you just can't avoid. One particular aspect is institutionalized the threat towards media, isn't it? You've heard of gag orders, several gag orders being placed by judiciary, isn't it? So there you find two estates come into conflict with each other, isn't it? One estate which has to be anchored with the conscience of people, that is the press, wherein the other estate is the central pillar whose sustenance is because of the unreserved reliance upon it by the common man, which has got a constitutional existence, namely the judiciary, right? So there are several instances where in 2019, 2020 cases, or even before that, you find there are several instances where gag orders have been placed, the unilateral gag orders have been placed by the courts, particularly in the matter of dissemination of information that could have been retrieved from the judicial exercises that happens within the four walls of the courtroom, isn't it? It has got a existence, or rather checkered existence, or rather it has got an existence even in 1968, when a very important case that you might have already come across, that is Naresh Marashkar's case, where the Supreme Court, in fact, justified the gagging of press by saying that it has got inherent power to issue gag orders, isn't it? So way back in 1960s itself, the court has, in fact, tried to put or make the mouth of the press shut, isn't it? By raising inherent powers. When the highest court in this country raises inherent power to gag, inherent power to close it, to put out media, then see how exactly the compatibility of the free speech concept freedom of press concept ingrained in 1901A goes together with another constitutional functionary while it exercises its power, isn't it? Even in Sahara India versus SEBI, isn't it? In 2012, it upheld temporary period gag order, saying that fair trial will be what? Affected. Amaravati land case, isn't recently, Jagan Mohan Rao, I think the Andhra Chief Minister, they preferred certain litigations against the outgoing Chief Minister, Chandrakant Naidu, isn't it? Where that was, in fact, the High Court, in fact, issued certain gag orders there. That when the gag orders were issued, the Chief Minister or the ruling front, in fact, lost that mileage that it could have raised from getting those allegations investigated. And that was appealed against before the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court, I think it lifted it, isn't it? Then against in the Me Too campaign, where a businessman, I think one Murthy, there was the Delhi High Court, in fact, imposed a gag order to the media that nothing, no developments of this particular case should be reported, isn't it? That was also lifted by the Supreme Court later. Muzaffarpur shelter home case in Patna, isn't it? Rape cases. So many persons were who were housed in that particular rescue homes were gang raped. There also the Patna High Court, in fact, under the garb of securing a fair trial, it imposed gag order. In the case of Justice Karnan, isn't it? Supreme Court itself, in fact, gagged the mouth. Rahana Fatima's incident in Kerala recently, isn't it? The Kerala High Court, in fact, went ahead with a unilateral gag order. Again, that was successfully appealed against before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said that that part of that particular order, which in fact was so unilateral, which had prevented the press or the media from reporting, was in fact what stayed by the Supreme Court. So see, when media, whether it is a print media or the visual media, have got the prime responsibility to engage in conversation or to prepare or to equip the people, commoner in the street, to indulge in political discussions, in discussions on socio-economic and cultural issues, then if you put gag orders on a unilateral basis, then how can it support or how can it address the cause? How can it conserve the freedom that has been granted on a precious note by the Constitution? See, that's being discussed across the country, isn't it? So even from the side of judiciary, through these type of orders, dialogues are being curbed, curtailed, conversations are being curtailed, isn't it? So in public spaces get shrunk, isn't it? So this has, in fact, seriously affected the delivering capacity of media as a fourth estate, isn't it? But there are so many other aspects also which had distinctly, in fact, diminished the capacity or the resourcefulness of the media as a fourth estate. So when we come to the fag end of it, see, the whole media ecology has changed now, isn't it? From the traditional print media or a later extension of visual media, we are crossing to the age of a digital media or a social media platforms, online newspapers, etc., where, in fact, on a significant note, the whole complexion of our concept about media is getting changed. So where with the advent of these types of over-the-top, that's OTT, or even so vibrant social media or online newspapers, which swiftly brings everything to the fore, which engages in discussion and which utilizes every single property in cyberspace, at sometimes unleashes hate content of hate. Not only in cyberspace, hate content is there in print media, hate content is there in visual media as such. But when it comes to cyberspace, the the way in which it reaches out to the nook and corner of the society, and also the modality, or rather the ulterior motives that it may secure, it may be able to secure by tarnishing the images, or by isolating people, or increasing the vulnerabilities of people, etc. Given that capacity, we have to see to it that, or we have to take notice of the fact that the media ecology has changed. The concept of fourth estate has not prospered, but shrunken, or has shrunk, because the concept of fourth estate, how far it is compatible with the advent of the those media which makes use of the cyberspace on a virulent note, or rather on a much more emphatic manner, wherein whether the basic attributes of a fourth estate is being further served, that again has to be discussed, isn't it? That again has to be put under a scanner. So if that cannot be secured, if we cannot strike a chord between the massive diversification that happened in the area of media, and also the very platforms that are being used for dissemination of information, and the vacuums and the silences that we find both in constitution as well as other legal architecture. In fact, we have to have a very serious, we have to engage in a very serious discussion, and we have to take a balance sheet as to whether the profit column is being filled, or the encumbrance column or the loss column is being filled, isn't it? So recently, or in fact 2-3 days back, the government issued certain guidelines wherein the court, in fact, or rather the central government has issued certain guidelines regarding OTT platforms and online newspapers, etc. I think yesterday I came across a circular from the Supreme Court itself, which in fact swiftly acted in tune with such a such sort of dictates. That is in the I think it's a communique to the advocates, wherein the circular read that it is, but it says that it is notified for the information of the advocates and record or party in presence that the creation of groups in WhatsApp for sharing the VC links, that's the video conference links, for hearing of the matter is restricted or barred due to new guidelines or regulations issued by the Government of India pertaining to social media apps and OTT platforms. See, the SOPs that have been put in place by the central government has been acted upon by the Supreme Court within a space of 24 hours, when the very same thing will be, in all probabilities, will be challenged before the Supreme Court to be examined in the backdrop of the constitutional guarantees. See, that is the persuasive power, isn't it? Even if you just consider the cases particularly relating to pandemic situations, and also in the case of migrants, etc., Supreme Court rather towed the line of the central government. And in the case of the reporting of pandemic, or rather the free speech concept in pandemic, when the precautions to be taken, etc., where the central government seriously complained, or rather gave serious complaint, or rather brought to the notice of the Supreme Court, that's the government is in grip, having complete grip over it. And whatever communications will be made will be done by the government and not by any media, isn't it? And the Supreme Court towed the line of such directions. So in many of those cases, many of the cases in 2019 and 2020, even on some other, if you track that record, apparently the Supreme Court has come into terms with or glorified the concept of press freedom. But when it comes to the operative part of the judgment, or the tangible aspect of that judgment, the values of press freedom or the guarantees of press freedom would have been steadily on the decline, whereas the parties will not get any profitable remedies, whereas the eloquence of the Supreme Court in the matter of application of the free press doctrines, or rather as a fourth estate, and its importance in a democratic setup. In fact, that is glorified. But behind that veil, when it comes to the operable part of the judgment, many of those restrictions which are being claimed by the executive are simply being towed, isn't it? So when we analyze the concept of right to information and right to know, which has to follow right to information, and as an agency which processes information or which carries that information, I may not be able to use the word processing. When processing means then you are value adding something. No, where you are carrying that information so that the government, between the state and the people, there could be a fruitful dialogue. In the matter of, or in the context of elections, by whom I shall be ruled. See, that's a very onerous question that has to be addressed by every single voter while casting his enfranchisement right. I think the best of its decision should come from the data that has been profiled before him, the information that has been gathered to him, the information of the manifestos of each of the coalition or the parties concerned, their previous track records, their blemishes, their prospects, isn't it? Who is to bring all these things to us? Only the media, isn't it? So that is why we find there are the threats that a person will come across, a threat that a person will identify in the shape of orchestrating opinions, orchestration of opinions through paid news and so many other things, will mar the very existence of press, particularly when it itself has to enter into dialogue with its constituents, like the one that is operating in the cyberspace, as to how they have to redeem their lost glory and to come back to that cutout figure of becoming or remaining as a fourth estate, which again is a very strong pillar, at least for us in a constitutional democracy like India. That is what I think I will conclude there, and that's what I have to tell you in this evening.
Thank you, sir. Dear participants, എന്തെങ്കിലും ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസോ ഡൗട്ട്സോ ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ചോദിക്കാം സാറിനോട്.
Yes. Today was a working day for you after a long day's travel.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Sir, വേറെ ഡൗട്ട്സ് ഒന്നും ഇല്ലെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു. സ്റ്റുഡൻസിന് ക്ലിയർ ആയിരുന്നു തോന്നുന്നു. Sir, വോട്ട് ഓഫ് താങ്ക്സിലേക്ക് പോകാം.
Okay.
Okay, I invite Dhanush to come up with the vote of thanks for today's session.
Good evening, everyone. Today, while hearing the speech of Girishankar sir, the thing which came to my mind, or the words which reached my mind first, is a biblical verse, which is, you shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free. It provides us with an insight about the importance of truth in a free society. Because if we want to have liberty, if we want to possess liberty, we must know about the truths happening around us. So if anyone, whether the establishment or some other people who want to steal liberty from us, will first steal the truth from us. So sir pointed out, or sir give an insight about that concept, the relation between true information disseminating among the people and the ability for that truth to guarantee us liberty. So that the another thing I want to thank sir in particular is that the mention about Edmund Burke, because we always speak about Rousseau and Locke in every academic discussions, but people, I think, is deliberately avoiding Burke, one of the greatest think of their times. But I thank you in particular for mentioning Edmund Burke and for giving us an insight about how this press or the outlets of information is a watchdog to protect or to conserve our democracy and freedom, and how the other estates and some of the economic and other kinds of establishments are trying to change them. So it was a very good, insightful lecture, sir. I thank you on my behalf and on the behalf of the institution and all other people who are gathered in this virtual gathering. Thank you and have a nice day, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhanush, for unearthing that basic aspect. You are absolutely true in that comment. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.